What is the moon, really? Is it a natural satellite or something else? Something that could change everything we know about the Earth and ourselves. Something with a secret base and a sinister agenda. Since the dawn of civilization, one of mankind's biggest mysteries has lit up the sky every night. Many aspects of the moon are difficult to explain. Its formation, peculiar orbit, distance from Earth, density, and structure have remained a mystery. In 1970, two well-respected Soviet scientists finally proposed a theory that answered every question. The moon is a spaceship placed into Earth's orbit by a higher intelligence. And the evidence for this? It's pretty convincing. The moon is a large celestial body composed of rock and dust that orbits the Earth. It's the brightest object in the night sky, and it makes the water go up and down, the seasons change, and the wolves howl. Many scientists believe that without the moon, there would be no life on Earth. But how did it get here? And why is it so unique? One of the oldest and simplest theories of the moon's origin is the capture theory. This idea says the moon was a wandering rock that got trapped by Earth's gravity. But the moon is too big and too close to the Earth to be captured. Also, captured objects generally have unstable orbits, but the moon has a nearly perfect circular orbit. Another mainstream theory is the co-accretion theory. This idea says the Earth and the moon were best friends from the beginning, made from the same space dust 4.5 billion years ago. But if this were true, the Earth and moon would have many more similarities. Instead, they are very different. The moon has very little water and is lighter, less dense, and rockier than the Earth. Now, the leading theory of the moon's origin is the giant impact theory. Imagine Earth doing its own thing collides with Theia, a Mars-sized object around 4.4 billion years ago. The result? A huge smash that sends debris from the Earth's coat into space. This debris then, over time, forms the moon. It's like the universe's own action movie. And while it sounds cool, is it believable? Many of the same critiques apply to this theory. If the moon was once part of the Earth, it would have more similarities with the Earth. If it was formed from a collision, the moon's circular orbit doesn't make sense. There are also many other heavily scientific critiques related to the moon's chemical composition and density. Also, it is important to consider the moon's bizarre characteristics. The moon is more like a planet than a satellite. Its circular orbit is unlike any other moon in our solar system. It's the largest moon of any rocky planet. At about 25% of the Earth's size, it is only 1% of the Earth's density. It rotates on its axis in the same duration it takes to complete one orbit around the Earth. This results in the same side of the moon never being visible to our planet. The moon is almost exactly 400 times closer to the Earth than the Sun, but it's 1/400th the size of the Sun. This creates nearly perfect biannual solar eclipses. Science can't explain these characteristics. There are no astronomical reasons for these coincidences. Most importantly, if the moon left our orbit tomorrow, the Earth's tilt could eventually be off by up to 85 degrees. Life as we know it would cease to exist. This begs the question, could the moon, with its unique features and characteristics, really be the product of a random collision? Or is it more likely that the moon is the product of intelligent design? The farther back in history you go, the less historical records of the moon there are. For example, in cave drawings from the Neolithic and Paleolithic periods between 2 million and 4,000 years ago, there are no representations of the moon. This is odd, given that the sun is widely depicted. And it's not just cave paintings. Aristotle wrote of the Arcadia region, saying that the land was occupied before there was a moon in the sky above the earth. Other ancient Greek authors made similar claims. In fact, the Romans, Mayans, and indigenous people around the world all have legends about a time before the moon. But if the moon hasn't always been orbiting the Earth, when did it arrive? And how did it get there? Scientists know humanity experienced a cataclysmic event between 10 and 12,000 years ago. During this time, there was an unexplainable shift in the climate. This contributed to the extinction of many large breed animals. Civilizations were wiped out by massive floods. Scientists have been trying to understand this event for decades, but it remains subject to debate. However, author Rob Shelsky's theory could settle the debate once and for all. According to Shelsky, these cataclysmic events were caused by the sudden arrival of the moon. This may seem like science fiction, but Shelsky's theory is based on historical evidence. The Tiwanaku were a pre-Incan civilization that existed in what is now Bolivia. In studying this civilization, archaeologists discovered paintings showing the moon coming into orbit. The time period referenced in these paintings was 11,500 years ago. Not only does this coincide with the cataclysmic event, it also coincides with the legend of the Zulu people of South Africa. According to the Zulu, before the moon arrived, Earth was very different. The entire planet was covered by a gentle mist. The Zulu tell the story of two brothers, god-like beings with scaly skin. These beings emptied the moon into a hollow shell and towed it into orbit in order to observe the human race. Upon the moon's entry, the Earth shifted, the tides rose, and the mist covering the Earth fell, creating a cataclysmic global flood. At first glance, this seems like nothing more than an ancient story, not something to be taken literally. But the Zulu knew a lot about the moon. They knew it impacted the climate and the tides, something modern humans only recently began to fully understand. Their story of a great flood coincides with many remarkably similar flood stories from ancient cultures around the world. These stories were once viewed as nothing more than myths, but we now know that a cataclysmic event took place during this time period. More and more evidence of a global flood continues to be uncovered. If these ancient flood stories reflect real events, what about the ancient stories about a time before the moon? If a global flood happened, the moon being placed into orbit would certainly explain it. And if the moon coming into orbit caused a global flood, what else about the Zulu legend is true? In 1901, author H.G. Wells tells the story of the interior of the moon being carved out and overrun by an alien species. While at the time his story was certainly intended to be science fiction, Wells may have been onto something, and 7 decades later his theory would be put to the test. In July of 1969, Apollo 11 completed its first manned mission to the moon. For NASA, this was an incredible achievement, but it was only just the beginning. The next mission launched just 4 months later in November of 1969. As part of Apollo 12, the astronauts would test the moon's seismic activity. NASA was finally going to learn about the moon's interior. To test the moon's seismic activity, the astronauts detached their lunar capsule and sent it plummeting toward the moon. The capsule crashed into the surface with the force of 1,000 pounds of TNT. As the capsule made contact, NASA scientists were stunned. The moon rang like a bell for an hour, the sound you would only expect it to make if it were hollow. At a press conference the following day, NASA personnel admitted they were baffled, but did not go as far as to say that they believed the moon was hollow. They would need to conduct further experiments. And next time, they would hit the moon with much greater force. During Apollo 13, the astronauts sent a portion of their launch vehicle towards the moon's surface. When it collided, it did so with a force 30 times greater than the capsule used during Apollo 12. This time, the moon rang like a gong for hours. But the sound was not the only anomaly. One NASA scientist claimed that the moon responded to the object as if it featured an artificial spring system designed to counteract the blow. During every subsequent Apollo mission, NASA ran an experiment called Chapel Bell. But the findings from these experiments are classified. No information about these experiments has been made public. Eventually, NASA claimed that the ringing sound is simply caused by the moon's dryness and low density. But if that were true, why all the secrecy regarding later experiments? Why do experiments related to the moon's interior need to be classified at all? Even if you are willing to accept NASA's explanation, the results of these experiments are only one piece of a complex puzzle. After each Apollo mission, we learned more about the moon. Each new discovery was a piece of this puzzle. When astronauts returned with rocks from the moon, we learned that the rocks on the surface are older than the rocks underneath the surface. We learned that the materials on the surface are less dense than the materials underneath the surface. These features make sense if the moon is hollowed out. We found some moon rocks that are much older than any rocks on Earth, the oldest of which were dated to the beginning of the solar system. There are elements of uranium-236 and neptunium-237 on the moon. These elements do not occur naturally. We have to create them. The moon is covered in titanium, chromium, and zirconium. These metals are very rare on Earth, but in abundance on the moon. They are some of the most solid metals in the universe and highly resistant to corrosion. Perfect metals for a reinforced structure. The moon's surface is covered with craters from asteroid impacts, but somehow these craters are almost all the same depth. One would assume if a larger asteroid collided with the moon, it would result in a deeper crater, but it doesn't. For centuries, there have been sights of strange lights on the moon. In 1992, the Aristarchus crater was photographed with a glowing blue light. This blue light has been seen regularly and has been nicknamed the Blue Gem. Some have speculated that this could be a fusion reactor. These are only some of the puzzle pieces that, when assembled, show a very different picture of our moon. With each Apollo mission, it seemed like we were closer to completing the puzzle. Then, after Apollo 17, NASA unexpectedly canceled the remaining missions. Over 50 years later, we have not been back to the moon, not even with a rover. NASA cited lack of interest and insufficient funding as the reasons for canceling the Apollo missions. But perhaps NASA canceled these missions because they didn't want us to complete the puzzle, because doing so may prove with certainty that the moon is not what we believe it to be, that it is, instead, something hollow, artificial, and much more sinister. Immediately after landing on the moon, the Apollo 11 crew reported seeing something unexplainable. Neil Armstrong allegedly switched to a private medical frequency and said, "They're here. They're parked on the side of the crater. They're watching us." This transmission was also reportedly intercepted by certain civilians who corroborated the statement. Buzz Aldrin has also talked about seeing a UFO following them on their mission. Skeptics have quickly dismissed these claims. But look at these men during the press conference when they returned. This was unquestionably one of the biggest feats in human history. But they don't look proud. They look shook, terrified even. They look like they just learned something that would change their perception of reality forever. Something that NASA knew before they sent these men into space. 2 years before the Apollo 11 mission, NASA's Orbiter 2 was taking photos of the moon. NASA was looking for potential landing sites. As scientists examined the photos, they discovered large, pointed spires. These spires looked similar to the Washington Monument. It was later reported that these spires were arranged in the same way as the pyramids of Giza. NASA acknowledged these photos, but said they were filed and they were not looking into them further. And these were not the only photos that NASA had showing structures on the moon before Apollo 11. In 1965, Sergeant Carl Wolf was working as a technician for the Air Force. His task was to repair equipment used for the transmission of photos from a lunar satellite. According to Wolf, he saw photos showing artificial structures on the moon, including what looked like a base. This is corroborated by another tech who was working with him. NASA would initially release these photos, but then delete them. According to NASA, these photos no longer exist. After Apollo 11, there are many stories of NASA destroying and altering photos of the moon. Ken Johnston, a former active-duty Marine and astronaut consultant, also claims to have seen photos of artificial structures on the moon from the Apollo 14 mission. He was told to destroy the photos and was eventually fired by NASA before becoming a whistleblower. In the early 1990s, Dr. John Brandenburg took part in a NASA mission called Clementine. Dr. Brandenburg and his team sent a satellite to map the moon and look for water. They discovered giant deposits of ice near the moon's south pole. But that wasn't all. They photographed an artificial structure that appeared to be using that water as a resource. His photos were provided to the Defense Department, but he was warned to keep quiet. According to Brandenburg, countless NASA employees and defense contractors are aware of not only structures on the moon, but an alien presence. These are only a few of the countless whistleblowers who continue to come forward. Of course, it is possible that these whistleblowers are not being truthful, but their dishonesty does not explain the many mysteries of the moon. The anomalies mainstream science continues to wrestle with. The ancient stories about a time before the moon. NASA's secrecy with respect to moon experiments. All of the leaked photos showing structures on the moon. NASA's decision to not go back to the moon. The list goes on. And if you are looking for answers to all of these questions, there is only one theory that explains everything. If you enjoyed this video and want to find out what else NASA is hiding, make sure to check out this video. As always, please remember to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.